Welcome back to the Young Turks Election Day coverage. For those of you who are members, oh, by the way, I should probably introduce Brett Ehrlich.
Hi.
He is one of the hosts for Pop Trigger and also a common fill-in for me when I'm not here.
Yep, anyone's gone, they call me about 4 minutes before, and I run here.
Exactly.
Or sometimes I use a Razor scooter, one of those old-timey Razor scooters.
Do you still have one of those?
No, I stopped using Razor scooters the one day when I had my friends, and I was walking up a ramp into a class, and this woman was walking down, and the Razor scooter, you hold the handle, and the bottom is very thick metal, and it just swung out and hit her right in the shin, and it was the worst I've ever felt in my life, because she was clearly in pain.
Well, one time I was testing a bowling ball, and as I kind of scooped it back, there was a child behind me, and it hit him in the face.
Wow.
So I think I beat you in terms of feeling bad about doing something accidentally.
Why do we tell you these stories? Because it's a metaphor for the election.
Absolutely. Catastrophe.
Hitting a child in the face with a bowling ball.
So in this hour, we are going to have some interviews. We hopefully will speak to Sam Seder, who, of course, is the host of The Majority Report, Kyle Kulinski, who is with TYT Network and hosts Secular Talk, and Nomiki Konst, who is a political analyst and the founder and executive director of the Accountability Project. So lots of really great guests. And then sprinkled in between these interviews, we are going to talk about some ballot initiatives throughout the country that are extremely notable. I know a lot of people like to focus on the presidential election, and I wouldn't say they think it's the end-all be-all, but they think it's the most important part of this election. But we're electing members of Congress. We are voting on ballot initiatives that are really going to have an impact on how our states are governed. So we are going to talk about all that in just a little bit. But before we get to all of that, I see you're wearing your I voted sticker.
Yes.
Okay, and so I want to know if your experience voting today was anything similar to what I experienced.
Well, my experience, I've had the pleasure of, and part of me feels terrible for saying this, I live in super white zones, like sparsely populated super white areas my whole life. And I go to vote. I'm one of the few within those areas that doesn't really have a normal job. So I went in, cruised in at about 10:30, and I did not have to wait at all.
Wow.
It was at a gorgeous fire department at the bottom of a beautiful hill. Parking was easy, got out, walked up. There was a pink table with my name in it. The woman, already though, there were signs that she had had quite the day. She was like, "What's your name? What's your name?" And then she had to find it. She got like the location wrong in the area for me to sign my name. But I finally got it.
Yeah.
Already the ballot box had been jammed, so she had to hand feed it into like the area below.
Oh, wow.
So they had some trouble. I had none. How about you?
So I showed up to the voting station 30 minutes before it opened, and already there was a gigantic line. And I was a little late to work as a result of all that. And look, a lot of people early vote, and that was an option for me, but I like the experience of going on election day and voting and kind of seeing what the crowd is like. And so, yeah, I waited in line for about an hour, finally got an opportunity to vote. There was an elderly woman actually in charge of like the signing and all that, finding your name and having you sign the signature. And so I told her my last name. I'm like Kasparian with a K. And she was like, okay, so then she's like in the P section, and then she keeps going further, and all of a sudden she's at the T's. And I'm like, are those names in alphabetical order? And she was like,
what a polite person you
I just
are.
didn't want to be, I didn't want to be rude to her, obviously. She was, very sweet lady. And she's like,
volunteering her time
yes,
on the day that symbolizes democracy.
Yeah. And then finally, I was like, I think you might have to go the other direction, like let's, and so she did very slowly, finally got to my name, finally had the opportunity to sign my name and then go vote. But it was a good feeling to see all those people, motivated enough to show up super early and cast their ballot, and vote on propositions in California, which I think are incredibly important, which include the death penalty, whether or not we're going to repeal it, whether or not we're going to legalize marijuana for recreational use. Numbers are looking pretty good for that. So
yeah, it's what I love most, and when we came back from break, I was just gripped by the sample ballot reading. Oh, it's one of the finest novellas I've ever read, opinions and whatnot. But what I love about the state ballot and the, my sample ballot is that we are voting on the death penalty. We are voting on legalizing marijuana, and we're also voting on, like, should we sell shopping bags at the mall? Should we sell them anymore? I don't know. Like, it's so sprawling, the breadth of our democracy and what we're chiming in on today. Like, should the local high school get a new gymnasium? Is on the same ballot as repealing the death penalty.
So let's talk about, California ballot initiatives just a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about notable ones throughout the country, because there are a number of deceptively written ballot initiatives throughout the country that I think people need to be very aware about. Now, in California, there is one proposition that says, hey, we want to spend $9 billion. We want to take out $9 billion in bonds to fund construction in public schools. So it makes, you guys know how much I love public education. You guys know how important I think public education is, and it has been severely defunded in various parts of the country. And so you look at that and you're like, wait a minute, there's some things, you investigate and you see that there are some interesting things happening. First of all, Republicans in the state of California support the measure. Republicans never support funding public education. So then the governor, Jerry Brown, who is a liberal, does not support the measure. And I'm like, what is going on? So I keep researching it, and then I find out that this was a measure that was pushed by construction companies that want to make money through state funding. The measure does not specify how the money will be allocated. So there are some concerns about it not being allocated equally to poor neighborhoods and poor schools. The schools that have consultants that essentially lobby for that money are likely to get that money. Poor schools don't have such consultants. Let's keep it real. And then also, it specifically allocates $500 million for charter schools, which is also another red flag because it shows where they plan on allocating the money to. Also, it's $9 billion, but by the time the state of California pays it off, assuming that they can pay it off, it'll go up to $17 billion with interest included. So the reason why I'm giving you guys that very specific example is because on its face, it looks like a great idea. And of course, I'm in favor of funding public education in any way we can. But you have to make sure that the way the funding works makes sense. If Republicans are in favor of funding something involving public education, it should be a little bit of a red flag, just considering the fact that, historically they've been very much against public education.
Right. We have Sam, it sounds like. So, but funding, I voted no on that. I looked at it, and it says how much it's $500 million per year for 35 years. It doesn't really say where it comes from. And a lot of those construction-based initiatives are ones where it's like, oh, the people who have connections within the government are the ones who are going to get paid.
Exactly.
And one of the most important themes following these state measures and whatnot is whether the benefits absolutely make their way down to the actual people.
Exactly.
And we're going to talk about that with right-to-work states in a bit, but that's like the key element for me.
Absolutely. All right, we have Sam Seder on the line. He's the host of the progressive radio talk show, The Majority Report. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
How are you doing?
We're getting ready to go live in about an hour or so. So I'm going through my sort of classic pre-production meltdown.
Oh, I hear you. We were going through that right before going live today, and Cenk was a mess. And so he's like, oh, I'm so stressed out. But it all works out. It's all fine.
Sam, what are you melting?
I know. I think I'm one or two cables shy of doing the whole thing, but we'll see.
I hear you. All right, so tell me about your feelings of today. Did you do early voting? Did you go to the polls today? What did you experience?
I do absentee voting. I'm actually registered upstate in Zephyr Teachout's district, and so I voted about a week ago.
Oh,
but
wow.
It's still pretty exciting.
So how are things different a week ago in the nation do you think your vote would have been affected in any way a week ago versus now? Because I haven't really talked to an early voter. You cast your ballot, and then you definitely saw a week of news about FBI and emails. How did you feel having already sent your ballot off?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I didn't. The FBI thing was a joke. The moment that James Comey announced it, I mean, I thought it was incredibly inappropriate. And even if the worst nightmare of Darrell Issa was true, it wouldn't have impacted my vote, because I think, largely speaking, that whole email server thing is a joke. I mean, I have a lot of problems with Hillary Clinton from a policy perspective, but as a progressive, as someone from the left, I know that Hillary Clinton is going to be a much better person to have in the White House if I want to grow the left, A, and B, pursue issues policies that are important to me.
So, Sam, an interesting thing has happened in the Democratic Party during this election, and it specifically has to do with individuals who also identify as progressives who feel uncomfortable voting for Hillary Clinton because of, let's say, yes, the email scandal, or more importantly, they think that due to the information that they have through WikiLeaks, they feel like it is immoral as a progressive to vote for someone like Hillary Clinton. Now, that's kind of divided the Democratic Party a little bit, and it's led to a lot of heartache for people like me and a lot of, I wouldn't say confusion, but a lot of difficult decisions for someone like me, because I see their point of view and I see their perspective. But what was your take on all of it?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, frankly, that it's divided the Democratic Party. I mean, look, I don't, to the extent that I am registered as a Democrat, I do that because I want to say in primaries that I think are going to be relevant to who I vote for in New York State. But I don't think that there's really a tremendous amount of data to say that it's divided the Democrats. I mean, but yes, there are people who are upset about it. A lot of people in my audience are also upset about it. I don't view voting as a mode of self-expression. Mm-hmm. Voting for me, my vote is a tool, and so like any tool I use it in the way that's going to give me the most desirable outcome based upon the context in which I use it. And there is, I suppose the argument, and one of the reasons why I actually, during the TYT town hall for Jill Stein, I asked Jill Stein if what the plans are to build the Green Party, because that would have been something that I would have used as a calculation in my vote. And so, I vote strategically, and mm-hmm. so I don't. It's not a question of me about morals. My own morality is not a function of who I vote for, except for in the context of what issues I want to promote. Mm-hmm. So it's not, for me, voting is not, like painting a picture or protesting or holding a sign or anything like that. It is a small means to promote a desired outcome.
Assuming that there would be more of a chance for a third-party candidate to win the election, would you be open to voting for a third-party candidate like Jill Stein?
I mean, if there was a chance of a third-party candidate to win, and I agreed with their issues more, of course. Mm-hmm. I mean, I honestly, for me, the Democratic Party is simply, I don't have any allegiance to the Democratic Party. I don't have any sentimentality towards it. It is, at least on a presidential level, in my mind, the best the best mechanism generally to promote my views, at least at this time. I mean, in fact, in New York, I don't vote on the Democratic Party ticket. I vote on the Working Families Party ticket. And we have fusion voting in New York, and that's not something that's available to everybody. But so, I mean, in that regard.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit for our audience and also for me, because I'm an idiot, what fusion voting means?
I mean, it's not. It's not surprising you wouldn't be aware of it because it's only in a few states in the country. So basically, the candidates can run on multiple party lines. So when you look at the ballot in New York State, Hillary Clinton is on the Democratic Party line. She's on the Working Families Party line. And whereas Donald Trump was on the Republican Party line, he was also, I think, on the Conservative Party line, and maybe one or two others. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, the Working Families Party will end up the Democrat will be running on their ticket. Sometimes they run their own candidate in more local elections, and they're now in like 4 or 5 states. And I don't know if they all have fusion voting, but they're growing. They're growing in infrastructure, and they don't attempt to run anybody on a national level. They pick and choose where they perceive strength to lie, locally. And they were the ones who threatened to run Zephyr Teachout against Andrew Cuomo. Now, ultimately, they didn't, but it did give Zephyr Teachout a platform where she primaried Andrew Cuomo and got about 35% of the vote, mm-hmm. which really, in many respects, I think maybe Andrew Cuomo doesn't realize this, but ended his national aspirations. And so I was, for someone like me, I was pretty happy with that because I'm not a big fan of Andrew Cuomo's. And so fusion voting basically means that you can that a candidate can run on multiple parties. And so you can strengthen a party while not being a spoiler.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, system in some states. We definitely don't have that in California.
Yeah, so for you, Sam, looking back, we're almost done with this election. We only have a few hours left. What's the highlight for you, or the low light, or was it the same moment?
The highlight or the low light? I don't have any one particular moment. I mean, my biggest, sort of frustration with this election was that the Clinton campaign did not. Specifically, their strategy was to not associate Donald Trump with the rest of the Republican Party, and I think that might, from my perspective, that is a huge lost opportunity. I mean, even those WikiLeaks, you could see the DNC was mad about this, that the Clinton campaign was not tying Donald Trump around Paul Ryan's neck. And I think that's a huge mistake. It also, I think, gives us a sense of like what the first battle for progressives is going to be. I mean, I think Clinton is going to attempt, with the help of Chuck Schumer, to pass some type of corporate tax repatriation bill, and I think they're sparing Paul Ryan and Republicans, more broadly speaking, is indicative of that. Is indicative of those plans.
I think you make a really good point about that. I think that Hillary Clinton is what a lot of progressives fear she is. I think that she is definitely, a more centrist Democrat. I think that she is a little more buddy-buddy with the Republican Party that a lot of people would like to believe. I
mean, it's a old school, classic, strategic move mm-hmm. in the kind of system that we have in America, which is there's a two-party system. If you have someone like Trump who typically you'd expect someone, if he's not even technically that far to the right, but he's just so far on the fringe with his ideology that what you would do is everyone to the left of you would think was on your side, so you just move right to capture more of the popular vote. That's what happened. And more to your point, we were just in Nevada.
I don't think Hillary Clinton moved right. I mean, to be honest with you, I think, Bernie Sanders pushed her policy positions further to the left than she wanted. Now, she didn't particularly run an issue-oriented campaign because it was basically the whole campaign was focused on Donald Trump as a monster.
Yeah.
And so I think Hillary Clinton in November of 2016 is to the left of Hillary Clinton 2015 November, and certainly to the left of Hillary Clinton November 2014. I mean, I think that is, at least in terms of stated policy positions. Now, whether or not she's actually going to execute those, I mean, frankly, there's not going to be an opportunity for a lot of those. But in terms of policy positions and in terms of what she run on, she is to the left of where she was a year ago. That's not.
I guess the better way to say it then.
It doesn't satisfy me, but that's the reality. But she did not do enough to force the Republicans to own Donald Trump, and that is really more about rhetoric.
Well, we were just in Nevada, and they're running an ad nonstop on the air in Nevada, which is Republican by Republican. They're going through Paul Ryan, the Republican governor there, and playing statements where they're disavowing Donald Trump, even though they haven't explicitly done that. But every moment when Paul Ryan said, like, that's the definition of a racist statement, and moments where the governor is like, I can't explicitly embrace Donald Trump. But that's what it is. And I guess it's better to say that the same way I said that Trump isn't necessarily further to the right, there's just people he's alienated. And it seems that rather than tying the Republican Party to Donald Trump, they're going after Republicans who have fallen away from Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it is an interesting strategy. Look, I think my biggest issue with this election overall has been the fact that it wasn't a policy-based election. I know that during the primaries, Bernie Sanders focused very heavily on policy. And then as soon as we had the two nominees, now we're just talking about people's character, personality, and yeah, that's important as well. You don't want someone as hideous as Donald Trump being the next president of the United States. But at the same time, I think that holding Hillary's feet to the fire is so important. So you're right. In terms of rhetoric and I guess official stated policies, she's moved to the left. But you want to hear more from her. You want to hold her feet to the fire. You want journalists and reporters to sit down with her and ask her the tough questions. Now, I know that she hasn't granted many journalists or reporters any interviews, and she certainly doesn't like press conferences either, but at least get into the nitty-gritty of what both candidates are proposing. I mean, Donald Trump, there's been very little analysis of some of the crazy policy ideas that he has. You watch television news, and it's all like, here's the crazy thing that he said today. Now let's have a 5-hour-long conversation about it. Yeah, he says crazy things every day, but what's even crazier is what he proposes to do if he gets elected.
Yeah, it's what.
Yeah, I think that's the media's fault. I mean, you look how much time was spent on that email stuff, which has at this point. I mean, the email server it is not operative. It is, and you look at the amount of time that was spent on that as opposed to issues. Yeah, I think it's a massive failure of the media. What's interesting is that we saw the flip of 2008, right? In 2008, the difference between the three leading candidates, between Clinton, Obama, and John Edwards, on policy was literally got down to the idea of whether or not there should be a mandate in the Affordable Care Act. I mean, that was virtually the only difference across every different issue set that you would have. I mean, I think Barack Obama on foreign policy was a little bit more dovish than Hillary Clinton in 2008, and I think that's probably the case now. But and maybe dovish is too strong of a word. But
definitely too strong of a word.
A little bit more on the dove scale, let's say, relative to Clinton. But this time around, we had all the arguments within the primary because of Bernie Sanders, because he relentlessly raised these things, and then in the general, where had it been, let's say, Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush or any of the others or Ted Cruz. You would have heard more about issues like choice, and you would have heard more about taxation, and you would have heard, and so in some ways, that prevented or made it less relevant for Clinton to tack to the center in terms of her policies, and so we still have the policies she exited. More or less. I mean, I think there's a couple of places where I've seen some hedges, but more or less from where she was in the primary, and that's a good starting point for the left because I don't think it's going to be like 2008. You're not going to get you're not going to have the left asleep for 2 or 3 years. I think it's going to be on day one. The left is going to be organized
hope so.
To push Clinton in certain directions.
I certainly hope so. And, Bernie Sanders has already famously said that he plans on holding her feet to the fire. And I love that. I think it's really important for progressives who feel like they haven't really had much of a choice during the general election to keep fighting. Just because the person that you didn't want got nominated and is likely to get elected doesn't mean that you give up the good fight. Sam Seder, host of the Majority Report, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
What if Bernie Sanders holds her feet to the fire, and much like Daenerys Targaryen, she just can't feel it? She's just like, I am Stormborn.
And then all of a sudden you see dragons appear.
She's like, Dracarys. And that's it. I don't know. I feel like Obama, when I think back to the 2008 election, the reason Obama was able to differentiate himself is the same reason that we look at the rallies today and we see Obama give a speech and we're like, God, you're awesome. And then we watch Hillary give a speech and we're like, okay, you're trying real hard.
She's not a good speaker.
Yeah.
She's actually a terrible speaker. I mean, there have been polls on, how trustworthy Hillary Clinton is versus Donald Trump. And even though Donald Trump is proven to lie way more than Hillary Clinton lies, people think that Hillary Clinton is not to be trusted. And the reason why is because when she's speaking, everything sounds very calculated. She's very careful. She's very, everything is very thought out before she actually says it. And I get that. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to be taken out of context. People are constantly hounding her. People are constantly on her. But just relax and have a conversation.
The thing is, that calculation is what cost her in 2008 because she does the politically expedient thing pretty much at all times, and we were just talking about that. And it relates back to the second reason, and probably to me the more important reason that Obama was able to differentiate himself from Clinton and Edwards in 2008. It's the record of voting against the Iraq War. And if you look at that specific vote, I don't even think it was whether to go into Iraq or not. It was whether to fund the extended time in Iraq. But when I think back on that election, that was it. Obama was able to stand there among senators and say, I voted against it, and you all voted for it, and I was right. And it feeds into the narrative that we're all talking about, and all have been talking about, that feeds into what the DNC did in correlation with Hillary Clinton, which is, let's have a long-term plan. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with what people believe or how strongly they believe it. It's, we have these tests and they bore out this way, so let's just go along with it at any cost. And I think that's what cost her. She looked around and she was like, well, only he's the only one who's voting against this, and everyone else I'm going to run against that I have to care about is voting for it, so I'm going to vote for it, and we'll just deal with it. But I think that's it.
All right. Well, now we have Kyle Kulinski on the show, host of Secular Talk. Kyle, how are you?
Hey, Anna. How you doing?
Good, good. I'm doing well considering the fact that today is, I don't want to say the last day that we have to deal with all this nonsense, but hopefully things calm down in regard to rhetoric after the election today. I was talking about this during the first hour of coverage. I was in Reno, Nevada yesterday for the Fusion show. And as I was waiting in line at Starbucks, there were two older white men. I know for sure one of them was from the Cato Institute because he was wearing a little, lanyard thing that had a sign. And they were just openly and very transparently talking about their disdain for minorities, for Latinos, for blacks, for Muslims, in the span of 5 minutes.
What kind of things did they say?
Okay, so Latinos have not contributed anything to society. I think they were specifically talking about immigrants, right? All they do is take. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember verbatim what they said. Of course, the standard Muslims are terrorists. They shouldn't be allowed in the country. And then when it came to black individuals, all they want to do is shoot and kill cops. Why does the media even waste their time talking about Black Lives Matter? Wow. That was the kind of stuff that was going on. And it was just so ugly that I couldn't take it anymore. And I turned around and I was like, we can cuss, right? I was like, shut the fuck up.
Bart in the booth is like, sure, I'm on audio.
I know that we're like trying to
I know.
keep it
And we also have Kyle.
professional.
Sorry, Kyle. We got into it there.
No, I know. So the reason why I'm bringing that up, Kyle, is because I'm at least excited that hopefully after this election, there will be some sort of strong message about how that kind of language is unacceptable. But I don't know. I could be wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that with Trump, there's a little bit of the cat's out of the bag, and there's no putting it back in. So there's some lines that he crossed where some not too bright people might think, oh, he's just keeping it real. But in reality, he's just keeping it savage. So, for example, during the election, he repeatedly said, yeah, I'm going to bring back torture. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring back torture. I'm going to bring back waterboarding. I'm going to do worse than waterboarding. He even said at one point, I'm going to torture, quote, even if it doesn't work.
Yep.
So that shows you it's not even like he's not even trying to put like a veneer of intellectualism over it. He's just like, you know what, I'm going to do it because I'm vicious and I'm barbaric. And I think a lot of people hear that and they go, yes, like finally it's coming out. When like during the neocon era, during the Bush administration, they did it, but they put the veneer over it of like, oh, it's enhanced interrogation. But Trump kind of drops the act and he kind of thinks. He kind of says, you know what, I think that the United States, we're the good guys, and we're the good guys by definition. So no matter what we do is okay. No matter what our enemies do is bad. And he's kind of very clearly divided everything up into, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And like you were listing there before, he launched his campaign by saying, yeah, the Mexicans, they're rapists, they're criminals. I assume some are good people. Mm-hmm. I love how he flipped it. Like a normal person would say, like, yeah, some of every group has criminals, but most are good people. He flipped it. He said they're rapists, they're criminals. I assume some are good people. And then, of course, like you kind of alluded to there, I mean, the Muslim ban, 1.6 billion people. We're not going to allow you in the country under my ideal policy. And then what's hilarious is that some people will, go on to say in the next breath, oh, but he's not a bigot. But that's like the definition of bigotry.
Yes.
He's saying, I'm going to keep out 1.6 billion people. And yes, I'm going to say it's close enough to ISIS and al-Qaeda if you're Muslim. So that's it. Well, look, that is saying I'm going to use policy against all of them because there are some extremists. And that's, this is kind of what he's let out.
What do you do with Muslims that are currently living in the country? Do you just go ahead and discriminate against them if they're American citizens? Like, none of those policy ideas make sense. And it's interesting because what you hear from the right wing over and over again, whether it be members of the electorate or politicians, is that they just desire the preservation of our Constitution. But they never really talk about what's in the Constitution and how we're supposed to have freedom of religion in the United States. It's not freedom of religion only including the religions that we like. It's freedom of religion. And, we, of course, have certain laws in several states that kind of ban anything that would harm others while you're practicing your religion. But nonetheless, you can't say, we don't like Muslims, we think you're all terrorists, so you're banned. That is not the preservation of our Constitution. That goes directly against our Constitution. Right. Torture, that goes against our Constitution. So it's just interesting because they'll say one thing and then do the opposite, and then they don't get challenged by it.
Right.
Well, yeah.
When you said the fear of calling him a bigot, that the instinct to do that harkens back to what you said about the veneer that people put on the bigotry that they were putting in there before, which is people are afraid to say the word bigot because bigot's such a word, you let it out of the bag. But the same instinct to put the veneer on it before is the same thing that if you I don't know, they're afraid that if they call them a bigot that they've gone too far and they've alienated people, when that is the wall you need to put down, that line in the sand to say this is actual bigotry. We need to call it out before we run the risk of having our words mean nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that's
right,
not bigotry. I don't know what it is.
And going back to Trump and the Constitution, Anna, what you were just touching on there, it's funny because Trump gets this, a lot of people view him, a lot of his supporters certainly view him as like, the last bastion of free speech, and he's a free speech warrior and crusader, and he's standing up against all these ultra PC college social justice warriors. But once you dig into Trump's history, you find out the exact opposite is true. I've said it for months now. The dude is a right-wing social justice warrior. He's the right-wing PC police because, for example, he sued Bill Maher over a joke that he made. Right. He sued The Onion over a satire piece that they wrote. This is the guy who goes around saying, I want to, quote, open up the libel laws so we can sue the media when they have negative things to say about me. I mean, if it was like a liberal on a college campus saying, I'm going to sue you because you made a joke that hurts my feelings, so I'm literally going to take you to court, everybody would be like, get the fuck over it. What's wrong with you? This is exactly what's wrong with the left, ultra PC, yada, yada. But for some reason, when Trump advocates the most extreme authoritarian policies when it comes to speech, he still somehow has the mantle of, being a free speech crusader, and that's just bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump has been very clear about his disdain for the media, banning or blacklisting certain media outlets from covering his rallies. And so, again, that goes directly against our Constitution. The First Amendment has nothing to do with businesses punishing you for saying something that they don't like. It has nothing to do with average citizens being offended with something that you say. The First Amendment has to do with the government taking action against you because of your speech. And Donald Trump has made it clear that he's an advocate of doing that. I mean, he's already done that when it comes to the media. So, again, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. Donald Trump, I would venture to say, doesn't even really know what the Constitution includes, right?
Oh, no way.
So
because it involves reading.
It does involve reading, and based on the way he tweets, I would argue that literacy is also a little bit of a problem for Donald Trump. But Kyle, let's move on to a little bit of your predictions. What do you think is going to happen today?
So I did a really long segment on this yesterday, and I have to say that I might have to amend what I said yesterday a little bit, because yesterday my prediction based on the numbers was Hillary Clinton 279. So I thought she was going to take it, but she was going to barely edge it out. And I said I wouldn't be surprised anywhere from 273 to 323 for her. Today, the forecast is a little bit stronger for her. So yesterday, Nate Silver had her chances at 65%. Today, her chances are up to 70%, which I mean, that's a big jump for one day. And what happened was the last round of polls were released, and I think the news that Comey cleared Hillary again on the email scandal might have contributed to that. But I do think Hillary might edge it out. I think it might even be about 300 electoral votes now. But here's the thing I wanted to mention that, I don't feel like gets talked about enough. Trump is putting up a fucking fight, and this race certainly isn't totally over. Mm-hmm. And I think he's been underestimated every single step of the way. So, I mean, we can go all the way back to before the primary. Oh, you know what? He's not even going to win a debate. Well, he won a debate. He's not going to win the second debate. He won the second debate. He's not going to win a single primary. He won a primary. He's certainly not going to, lead in the polls. He led in the polls the entire fucking time. Mm-hmm. He's certainly not going to be the nominee. Oh, fuck, he's the nominee. And then the very next sentence is what? Well, he's certainly not going to be the president.
I know.
So, well, if you look into the history, there have been years like this. If you compare selecting Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, you compare that to years like Goldwater, where Goldwater was chosen as the nominee. But if you then look at the electoral maps and all of those, one party picked a total weirdo or a totally weak, what you would conventionally consider as a weak candidate. If you look at the electoral map in those years, it is a landslide, an utter crazy landslide. But as you said, this year, it isn't going to, even if it is a landslide by our definition of landslide, it's not a Mondale year. It's not a Goldwater year. There's no way. In Goldwater's year, he just carried like a thin band of the South. Mm-hmm. Those days are gone. And I am racking my brain to reconcile those two things that doesn't involve some not so latent racism, as you were saying, the veneer turning into a dog whistle that no one could hear until someone came out and shouted racism. It's hard for me to preserve some kind of optimism about the American electorate in the face of this crazy, nearly 50-50, but more like 40-40 electoral map.
Look, I think the hardest part about this election was the huge reality check that people like me got, and the exposure of pure ignorance of members of our electorate. Okay, on both sides, by the way, but dominantly on Trump's side. Some of the field reporting that Jordan Sheridan did, where he went and talked to Trump surrogates or Trump supporters, their lack of knowledge. I mean, the one thing that stood out to me the most was one of his supporters arguing that Huma Abedin might be a traitor to the United States because she has a Muslim-sounding name. There was no evidence whatsoever Okay, but it didn't matter because she has a Muslim-sounding name, an Arab-sounding name. That's what she said. So she might be a traitor.
So
anyway.
Anna, I think that's all true, but I'd also add one more element to it, which I think is really important about the Trump voters and this populist backlash in general, which is with Donald Trump, you actually have a Republican who was willing to say things that there's no way Mitt Romney would have said, and not just the bigotry stuff, which again is true. He takes their coded bigotry a step further. There's no doubt about that. But he's also just way more economically populist than them. So, I mean, you listen to any stump speech he gives, he's hammering the TPP. He's hammering NAFTA. Mm-hmm. He even, on some occasions, comes across as more liberal than Hillary Clinton on foreign policy, which is crazy if you think about it. I mean, he keeps hitting her for corruption. That's not saying he's not corrupt, but certainly his rhetoric on the campaign trail is she's the establishment, I'm anti-establishment. This is a guy who, during the primary, railed against Social Security cuts. That's something that no Republican does, especially in the primary. They're supposed to unanimously agree and say, yeah, we're going to cut Social Security and Medicare. We're Republican assholes. He didn't do that. I mean, so this is a guy who, even infrastructure, he said, you know what, I want to stop spending money on the wars, and instead I want to rebuild our infrastructure here. So I feel like that aspect of it is something that has made Trump a more viable candidate than he should be. But also Hillary's lack of an effective response on that stuff has kept this race close. Because, I mean, what does Hillary do? I mean, I saw one of her ads yesterday. I was watching The Walking Dead, and during the commercial, they played her ad. And which ad did they go with? They went with the one where it's like, Donald Trump saying naughty words and cursing. And then we're all supposed to watch it and go, oh, my goodness, I can't believe that an adult talks like an adult. So instead of hammering him in ways that make sense, like, oh my God, you just said, quote, we have to take out their families and kill civilians in the Middle East. That's crazy. Yeah. Instead of focusing on that stuff, instead of focusing on policy and highlighting areas where she's clearly better, like with climate change or the Supreme Court, or the fact that he wants to eliminate the FDA and the EPA, instead of hammering on policy, what Hillary did is she kind of ran this just vague campaign on cliches and platitudes of stronger together and all shit like that.
Because you also just described Trump's campaign, which is vagaries and the opposite of platitudes.
Look, all Hillary Clinton did, and by the way, we just spoke to Sam Seder, and we all agreed on the exact same thing. She didn't have to focus too much on policy, or on policy at all, because as long as you attack his character, or as long as you sit back and you let him attack his own character or expose his own character, you're gonna fare pretty well, and she is faring well tonight. But still, it's too close to comfort, according to the polls, if you ask me. Anyway, Kyle Kulinski, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck tonight. Hopefully we get decent results.
All right, you too, guys. Have a good one.
Bye. All right, so...
Here's the thing. Let's talk about irreparable damage that Trump could maybe do. We were in a cab in Reno, which is the beginning of a great story. And I know the guy hadn't farted right before we got in the cab. But I know that the cab smelled like farts. This is my biggest fear about Trump's presidency, but Trump's having run.
That cabs might smell like fart?
Did he fart enough in the cab of America? Because he did it all the time, and I had a car for 150,000 miles, and I farted in it so much that when I gave it over to someone else, I was sad because I knew it smelled like farts. Did he fart enough in the car of America that even if he loses, when he hands that car over to Hillary for the presidency, will it still smell like fart? And what kind of farts will it smell like? Like,
I think so.
Did he do such irreparable damage? And will we find that magic air freshener, that Febreze that doesn't counteract odors, but somehow neutralizes odors? That's my question.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's irreparable harm, because that means there's no way of repairing it. I think that what Donald Trump has done is he has made racism, bigotry, sexism, America's real views on sexual assault and rape very open and transparent. And so we now know what people really think about these issues. And I think that in the very least, now that we know we have these problems and we've admitted that we have these problems, we could hopefully take some steps to solve them. That's me being super idealistic, and I know that it might be a little naive. But what I actually wanted to talk about a little bit is
Not farts.
Not farts, but the stench of this election wafting into the weeks after. Because Donald Trump has already filed lawsuits against Broward County in Florida and also Nevada. Because in Nevada, he is alleging that early voting places closed the polls later than they were supposed to, which allowed for people who typically vote Democratic to vote after the polls were supposed to be closed. So it shows you two things. First of all, he is not expecting to win tonight. Okay, so we're talking about battleground states that are very important, and he's expecting to lose in those battleground states. It's also showing you that after this election, there might be a fight on the Republican side. There might be, allegations of a rigged election, whatever it is. We'll see what happens. But I don't think it's going to end tonight.
How can you argue a rigged election if they didn't enforce the rules? Like if they weren't like, stop. It's not rigged. It's like you're arguing against more people voting.
That's exactly right, by the way. And what Clark County is alleging, and Clark County is what they're specifically focusing on, is no. The only thing we did is we allowed individuals who had waited in line that entire time to go ahead and cast their ballots, even though the polling station was closed. It was closed. We're just letting the people who have been waiting in line to finish voting. I just think it's a really interesting argument from the Trump camp. And, based on some commentary from legal analysts, it seems that he's unlikely to win that type of challenge. But we'll see how it goes. We really will, because I'm just worried. I'm worried about what's going to happen after tonight.
That's not a new strategy from at least people on the right, because when you look at the numbers, there's just way more Democrats / people identifying as liberal as there are people in the country who identify as conservative.
Oh man, Republicans love to go after anything that would harm Democrats from voting.
Yeah, in the same way, what we see is both sides going after things that would benefit them. The difference is that the Democrats seem to always be arguing like, let's just make sure that everyone can vote.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that I find it easier to side with. I went and voted today, and I don't get very emotional, don't have many feelings, but I was like voting, and I'm like using the tiny stupid pen, just go because we just have like a stamp marker.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is great. People died for this stuff in a very real way, not like I'm making fun of it.
All right. We got to go to Nomiki Konst. She is a political analyst and communication strategist, also founder and executive director of the Accountability Project. Ms. Konst, I apologize that you don't have a lot of time to talk to us, but thank you so much for joining us.
Sorry.
Thanks. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hey, good. All right. So tell me a little bit about your predictions for tonight. I asked most of our guests, and I'm curious to see if maybe you have a different interpretation of how tonight's going to go.
I think that most of us at this point are actually doing really well with predictions, despite our during the primaries being so far off. I think one thing is that for the most part, general elections, there's some really great data, give or take a couple states where polling isn't great. But for the most part, I mean, listen, yes, there's going to be the secret Trump voter. There's also going to be the secret Hillary voter. And every qualified pollster I've spoken to realizes that those numbers pretty much cancel each other out. So I think it's going to be a big win for Hillary. Really, it comes down to the Senate. It's pretty much what everybody's saying. I've been in Philadelphia. I was going to different polling locations to see if there were any poll watchers. Turns out nobody reported any. Talked to the DNC lawyers. No real threats for poll watchers. It was a lot of talk on Donald Trump's part to keep voting down. But Democrats are used to this. They staff up with lawyers. They have a really great operation. So I think it's going to be a good night. Now, does that mean that we're going to win states like Pennsylvania, the Senate seat? I don't know. But she doesn't have the battle that he has. He has to win basically every swing state that's in his must-win category, meaning Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania. This is Nevada. He has to win those states. He has to win Arizona to win.
Yep.
Hillary doesn't. She can win Florida and pretty much win this election. So it's looking very, very good for Democrats, and I think that's why it puts progressives in a really strong position right now, because if we start thinking right now rather than on January 21st about what to do to influence our next president, this is the time to do it, when she's selecting people to join her administration.
What do you think about some of the challenges that Trump's camp is hurling toward Nevada and Florida. He claims that Nevada broke some laws by keeping polling stations for early voting open later than they should have. They're arguing that absentee ballots were not sent to Republican voters in Florida, Broward County to be specific. What do you make of all of this? Do you think that it's much to do about nothing, or do you think that, hey, maybe there was some wrongdoing here?
Listen, every election there's going to be some issues. It's just the way our systems work. It's state by state. Every state manages it on their own. The FEC doesn't really enforce a lot of this stuff as they should. But the reality of the situation is if it's worth the fight, the RNC will fight that fight. They've got the resources. Once Donald Trump loses, all of his money is going to go away. I don't think he's going to be investing money in lawyers and fighting this stuff. He's not. This is, he knows that he will lose. And he'll lose because he doesn't have the RNC support. He'll lose because he wasn't on message. He'll lose because he didn't have the operation he needed, and he played games with Roger Stone about voter suppression rather than really garnering his support. If he loses, it's not going to be because a few people weren't registered properly or didn't get their absentee ballots in time. He will lose because he's a bad candidate who does not stick to the message and does not work with his party, and that's why he'll lose. Also, the Democratic map was already in favor of Hillary Clinton, with everything else against Donald Trump. Add that to it.
So I get the sense that you are much more positive of Hillary Clinton, and I'm curious, what do you think?
I was a Bernie surrogate.
I know you're a Bernie surrogate, but I just, as a Bernie surrogate, I'm curious to see, which policies you're concerned about when it comes to Hillary Clinton.
You cut out for a second there. I'm in a train station. I apologize.
No worries.
I thought you said what policies you think we can influence her on?
Not influence her on, but which policies do you have the biggest problems with?
Her environmental policy, her banking policies, where she's accepting money from. You can't be for one thing or against one thing and accept money from the interests that are in opposition to that. And I think that that's what voters really saw. Emails, all that other stuff, the way that the DNCs run. I honestly believe that that's going to clean itself up. I think that they were shocked. I think WikiLeaks is a big part of it. I think the fact that we Bernie surrogates took over half the convention and the Democratic platform meetings. But for her, she's going to get a lot of pressure from the left on the Dakota Access Pipeline, on environmental issues, on where she's accepting money. And I think that, the DNC was a fundraising organization. That's what it became. And with that, they were really focused on fundraising for the presidency, and didn't focus enough on local elections. So she can't be the best president she can be without having all those seats to support her. And I think we all know that. Look at Evan Bayh. Evan Bayh is basically the best Republican the Democrats have. And he's in a weak position because of it. Those games just don't work anymore. The country's more progressive. The party's much more progressive. She's going to have to start working with progressives.
All right. Nomiki Konst, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great night.
You too. All right. How much longer do we have before we got to go to break? All right, we got to wrap. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the interviews. Do you have any final thoughts, Brett?
No, I have zero final thoughts. I was just sadly contemplating the future of America. I mean, for me, everything that everyone has said has signaled massive party realignment in America. What it is someone who polls a lot and is very clinical about their approach, that's Hillary Clinton, versus an idiot savant who's able to instinctively, through his egomania, just sniff out pockets of voters and appeal to them broadly. And those are the opposite. This is to steal from Bryan Cranston, this is a Shakespearean situation where you have two nemeses and they're going against each other, and it seems like people who did their homework are going to win.
All right, guys, we got to go to break, but later on in the show, we will talk specifically and in great detail about the ballot measures and how they're doing, and we will, of course, give you results from the election. Stick around. We'll see you soon.
I'm Jimmy McMillan.